The likelihood that someone is actually using valid credentials to either start a breach or get access to another account just continues to go up. And this goes along with everything has a password. Password managers are almost a necessity at this point in time if you want to try to keep unique passwords to keep this likelihood down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode of Hive Live. I'm Alex Netty, and joining me today are my co-hosts, Katie Dotson, and the newest member of our team, Kyle Simmers. Katie, welcome.
Thank you.
And Kyle, welcome to the team.
Thank you.
Excellent. Hopefully you all at home have been following all of our great approachable cybersecurity content on social media, but if you haven't, you can find us on all the major channels with our handle @Hive Systems. Make sure and give us a follow today and subscribe. Today, though, we're going to be getting in the Halloween spirit, talking about some of the recent cybersecurity horror stories, tales of employers and clients past, and frightening statistics about today's cybersecurity trends. So let's get right into it. We pulled together a little graphic here to talk through some statistics and guide the early part of it. You can call them spooky statistics for spooky season. That is fine by me. But all of these are starting to rack up and are just some interesting data points. We've pulled these from a number of industry-led cybersecurity reports, and we'll talk about each of those reports in detail in just a few minutes. But there's a couple interesting ones in here to highlight. First, for sure, the percent of breaches that involve a human element is up to 74%. 74%, meaning that for us as humans, we continue to be the weakest link in most IT systems. Something more interesting as well is the percent of breaches involved in abuse of valid credentials. So getting your credentials stolen and then someone being able to log in. So likely the result of reusing passwords or not enabling MFA. We've also seen the average cost of a data breach go up in 2023 to $4.45 million. However, with the new SEC ruling and the requirement to file 8K reports, we're expecting to see a lot more transparency about the actual cost of breaches. Currently, for example, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the MGM casino hack has racked up quite the bill. Interestingly as well, the average time for a hacker to go from initial access to being able to move around the network is only 84 minutes. That means from the first computer that they get access to, their ability to move to another one is just under 2 hours. That's a scary amount of speed. We're also seeing that 33% of breaches are discovered by the company's own security team, which is a pretty low metric. That means that oftentimes that other 66% is coming from external people reporting it or third parties. And finally, the percent of breaches involving ransomware is at 24%, which is still 1 in 4 cases, a pretty staggering statistic. We're starting to see that go down as some of these other ones have come up. But all in all, these are some pretty terrifying statistics. These are all assembled from a number of places. And one of those first places is the Verizon DBIR report. They publish this every year in 2023, and they evaluated over 16,000 incidents and 5,200 data breaches. So it's a great source of data, and you can find it online. And yes, this is Verizon, as in your wireless carrier or internet carrier as well. Another report that we pulled some information from, Kyle, is the CrowdStrike Global Threat Report. You can talk about some interesting things from that one.
Yep. So they analyzed this last year as well, and that's where you're seeing the statistics for decreasing for the amount of time, right? So it's a couple things that are being added there. Threat surface is increasing, endpoints are increasing, but all of those things come together and create a higher risk profile for something that could go wrong within your network for once a hacker has initial access. They're being able to kind of switch over to another asset that they find a weakness in. Asset management continues to be an issue almost everywhere. Knowing what you have you secured it? Because you can't secure it unless you know you have it. So that's one of those important things to kind of figure out is get a handle on what assets you have, what's most important, where you think someone could find the weak link, and kind of try to put in some remediations there. The other one here is going to be talked about a little bit more as we go too, but we're always harping on passwords, credentials, MFA. So the likelihood that someone is actually using valid credentials to either start a breach or get access to another account just continues to go up. And this goes along with everything has a password. Password managers are almost a necessity at this point in time if you want to try to keep unique passwords to keep this likelihood down.
Yep. And for that 84-minute statistic, what was it last year? I know it was somewhere higher than that.
It was 96, so not a huge change. 12 minutes, but time is valuable when it comes to a response.
Yeah, definitely. The other report we took a look at as we pulled some of these statistics include the IBM cost of a data breach report. And Katie, you took a deeper dive at that. Tell us a little bit about what you read.
Yeah, so IBM basically took a look at 553 different organizations that were hit with data breaches in the last year. That's where the statistic is coming from, that the average cost of a data breach has gone up to 4.45 million. That's up by 2.3% from the previous year. 82% of data breaches actually involve data that was stored in the cloud. And for the cost of data breaches, most of the companies that are paying more in those data breaches are actually healthcare related organizations. So those that are dealing with PII and PHI. Healthcare specifically had a 53.5% increase in cost of a data breach since 2020. So a pretty significant increase in just a matter of 3 years. The other thing here with ransomware, so as Alex mentioned, 24% of breaches are involving ransomware. IBM did see that those companies that did not involve law enforcement to help them with their ransomware activity actually paid 9.6% more than the companies that did involve law enforcement. And then kind of shocking to me is that of the organizations that were polled for this IBM cost of a data breach report, only 51% of the participants said that they plan to increase their security investments as a result of a data breach, which means that nearly half of these companies are just kind of saying, oh, well, we got breached, let's move on, and not investing in further security investments to protect that data. So it's kind of a staggering number to me, especially when it comes to how expensive these data breaches are, how critical that information is to your individual privacy, as well as customer data and everything else. So that's a lot of companies that are not going to invest in additional security features to protect your data. And then going back to what Alex said about the percent of breaches that are discovered by your company's own security team, that's a pretty low number, only 1/3 of breaches being discovered internally. So the other 2/3, as Alex mentioned, are being either discovered and reported by a benevolent third party or by the attackers themselves. So often seen with ransomware, you'll get locked out of your systems and get a notice that you've been hit with ransomware, and the attackers are the ones who are telling you, that they've gotten into your system and stolen your data. So going back to what Kyle said, really important to have your internal monitoring, your internal security awareness teams kind of keeping an eye out for this activity so that you can kind of try to stop it and block it before that 84-minute window when they get more access to your network.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, Kyle, that for those companies that are kind of just not beefing up their defenses after a data breach, are they just relying on things like cyber insurance to cover down the difference? Is it just, this is where we are in 2023 and everybody gets breached, so we just don't care?
Well, so that's an interesting question, right? If you take a look online of when things are announced, and they're announced in various forums, something like some of the blogs for credit card churning, for example, they're notifying when breaches are occurring, and you'll go into the comments and you'll see people sitting there like, oh, okay, well, can't wait to collect my $2 check from the class action and get a year of credit monitoring. So I think it's a mix of both. The relying on insurance, which costs are going up, but at the same time, there's almost like a general lack of care amongst most individuals.
Apathy.
Yeah, you just get breach after breach in a year, and so once you are part of 4 or 5 in a year, really, what's the point?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I've collected my couple dollars here and there from various breaches, Yahoo and Equifax and everybody
Yep.
else. So really raking in the bucks and feeling great about the fact that my data was still stolen. Yeah, that makes me feel well. Speaking of money and one of our favorite topics, we're going to move on and talk about a story that has just been raking over the news, both in the cybersecurity world and for those who are heading out from a tourism perspective to Las Vegas. It's the MGM hack. You may have been reading about this ad nauseum as it started out small and then became big enough to not only impact their operations, but even the way and ability for people to gamble. And as a result, it's been in the news and going around everywhere. From there, Katie, I want you to hop in and help us break this down a little bit. It's been an interesting ride for sure.
Yeah, so last month, MGM was hacked using Black Cat ransomware. So basically, their systems were shut down for a whole 10 days while they tried to figure out how to get their systems back up and running. So not only were the gambling systems down, but their money exchange and their hotel systems, and even just like the key cards for accessing your doors, all of that was down. So all of their customers and the gamblers and the people who were at the hotels and things like that obviously were kind of stuck. There wasn't really a whole lot that they could do during that 10-day window. As of right now, MGM says they actually did not pay the the ransom, but they still saw $100 million hit to their third quarter profits as a result of losing that business for those 10 days. So that kind of just goes to show, the trade-off there.
Yeah, and compared to the average
Yeah.
cost of a data breach here that we've noted at 4.45 million, that's a pretty big increase. And like we said, as more data becomes readily available through these 8K reports required by the SEC, we're likely to see a lot higher statistics as people become more transparent about their company's breaches.
Yeah, so not only were they hit with the Black Cat ransomware, but while the hackers were in there, they took some information about their customers' gender, date of birth, some driver's license numbers, a smaller amount of social security numbers, and passport details for customers that use their services all the way back before 2019. So I'm sure they're going to incur additional costs there for things like identity monitoring for those impacted customers as well. But probably one of the more interesting points when it comes to this particular hack is the way that the attackers got into the system. So the hackers are part of a e-crime group referred to as Scattered Spider. They call themselves Star Fraud, and it's actually a group of teenagers and early 20-somethings who basically went on LinkedIn, found an employee's information, impersonated them, and called an IT help desk for a password reset. And that IT help desk person gave them a temporary password that let them log into the systems and deploy that ransomware. So a bunch of teenagers used the weakest link, the human element of cybersecurity, to get onto this network, cost the company more than $100 million in profits. And this group actually got the ransomware through a ransomware as a service model. So if you're not familiar, basically, other more sophisticated hackers post ransomware as a service on the dark web so that just about anybody can pay a certain amount to get a pre-built package that they just have to deploy on the system. And so these Star Fraud hackers or Scattered Spider hackers actually got the Black Cat ransomware from former Russian APT group. They were involved with the Black Matter and the Dark Side ransomware that hit Colonial Pipeline. So those more sophisticated Russian APT actors created the malware. These teenagers basically bought the ransomware from them and then deployed it on the network through the human element, the weakest link there, through social engineering and phishing.
That's brutal. Kyle, definitely as we think about data spread, right? And in this case, we're just thinking of it being a casino, but it's also a hotel and all this other information. I think we see a lot of companies collecting too much information sometimes, or the right amount of information. How do companies kind of stop this spread and hiding all of their information in one place? Because in this case, they've lost a lot of different kinds of information. It's not just the availability of casino machines. It's passports and social security numbers and everything else.
Yeah, it kind of starts to get into more segregation, right? If you are operating your casino differently than you're operating, say, your hotel, you have your suite of properties that you have anyone staying, or you have your club membership for the casino. Instead of tying those two things together, you can kind of create segregation there and keep some of that data isolated from each other so you can't kind of get everything at once. Starting to happen more, though, is kind of that aggregate, right? Everyone's looking into data analytics. How can I pull the most interesting crowd of people based upon other factors? So there's kind of that inherent want to aggregate all that data so you can build a profile of a person of who is coming in and spending the money so they can figure out how to target. It becomes really a balance there of, if you're going to do that, how are you going to take the proper steps necessary to protect that information?
Yeah, I suppose it's the risk of, or the reward of trying to get more information out at the risk of getting more egg on your face. And unfortunately, I suppose in this case, they've got a little bit of egg on their face. Katie, any other thoughts on this one for MGM? Probably the biggest thing I can think about is social engineering is hard to thwart, but probably there's some other lessons learned coming out of here as well.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, social engineering is a hard one to thwart. Some of the best things you can do for that are just security awareness training and not providing passwords over the phone. But you know, with employees continuing to be the weakest link in your cybersecurity chain, you've got to do whatever you can to make sure that they're not just sharing that information and making it easier for attackers to get into the system.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely think validating employees, yeah, through extra methods, anything that you can to avoid just giving out credentials like this. Oh, what a good one. That takes us into my next favorite one here, and this one has been all over the news, though it's maybe not quite as interesting as we think. It's the 23andMe hack, and everyone's talking about. Obviously, it's unfortunate when you lose your social security numbers or your credit cards or your passwords. It's another to lose your genetic information, as one of those you can change, and the other you're kind of stuck with for your life. In this case, of course, 23andMe has seen a large data breach come in. And Kyle, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
Yep. So that's what we're talking about. We started to harp on passwords, right? The initial attack vector for this was credential stuffing. So it's just really harping on people who are reusing passwords from site to site, and they found compromised passwords and they just started plugging them in, and they were able to gain access to a ton of accounts, right? So nothing too interesting there. We've been harping on passwords all the time. Password managers, how do you protect yourself? Multi-factor authentication, right? It's almost become bread and butter at this point, and people hear it so often, but it just doesn't kind of click, both for individuals, as well as companies. Not everyone is using password vaults at their corporations. Not everyone is the individual consumer. Take a 27-year-old still not signing up for a password manager, doesn't remember their password, so they just use one password repeatedly. That's where you're putting yourself at risk. But for 23andMe, it does become interesting there, right? So this is the first time where something non-standard like genetic information is really being taken. We've talked, about biometrics before and how biometric authentication is used. This is a little bit different. So this starts to get into kind of future state, right? So there's this information that's taken at this point. What can really be done with it right now? There's not a ton of things that people are coming up with, but as you look to the future, could that information be useful? Don't really know. Alex, what are your thoughts there?
I mean, I guess what? I'm going to take some genetic information, I suppose. Obviously, from a genome sequencing perspective, I'm finding family members and potentially maybe family members I didn't know about. That could not be ideal if you didn't know about them. So off the top of my head, that it leads to a little exploitation, right? Emailing people and demanding payment to not release that information. I suppose that same genetic information could hold, HIPAA-related information that you're predisposed for health issues or that you currently have health issues. And as a result, again, a great opportunity for extortion and payments, which of course are the things du jour. So yeah, I don't love it on the whole. Again, especially because it's biometric, there's not a whole lot you can do. It's hard to protect at that point. And it definitely brings me back to the OPM hack from 2014 or whenever it was. And a lot of both federal government employees and contractors who had their fingerprints on file through various security clearances lost that. And so as a result, those could be used to unlock phones or validate identity or frame you. Now I'm thinking of like the whichever Jason Bourne it was, where they stick his fingerprint on something. All of those things, right, can happen. And so is it going to impact the everyday person like a stolen credit card? Maybe not initially, but as people come up with more interesting things or find interesting people in there who may not want certain health things released, they become a target. I also think it tracks with kind of where we're seeing ransomware go, where it's moving from less of a scattershot approach to trying to, ransomware everyone, to say we're going to focus on people who are potentially either susceptible or can pay, like a casino, and try to get our best bet. I have to imagine some of this information instead will be routed through and find the more interesting people from 23andMe and likely, unfortunately, lead to potential extortion around it.
You know what another potential very scary thing could be? Actuaries could find this information pretty useful. So actuaries are driving your insurance models for how much you're taking on as a risk as an insurance company for covering someone. This information where it's genetic predisposition for certain diseases or conditions can feed into, the insurance companies will now have access to that information if they do take,
millions of data points
dive down to get the data.
Oh, gross. But unfortunately, probably not very far-fetched. Probably actually more likely than some of those scenarios that I covered, which is yucky. And of course, I'm sure those companies would deny it. Feel free to add us if you work there. That being said, that takes us into a different interesting realm, kind of in more classic cybersecurity. As we've talked about many times here on Hive Live and within our ACT post, we talk about vulnerabilities. Again, these are problems in your code on your devices or the apps that you use and love. And the idea is that when they're discovered, ideally by the companies that write it, they race to quickly fix and patch that. And they push out updates. One of our themes here in Cybersecurity Awareness Month is, of course, keeping your devices and your apps updated all the time. That way you can close the door to these hackers and scammers. The trick is that if that update is released and you don't update, hackers and scammers can try to take advantage of it, break into your app or break into your device. And so it's always up to you to update those as quickly as possible. The catch, though, is there are occasionally some scenarios that we call zero-day vulnerabilities. And the idea here is that there is no patch. And unfortunately, the person who discovered it and this hole in the code is the hacker or scammer themselves. That creates a huge race against time for both the company to try to patch it, but for us as individuals and companies to try to mitigate that risk. Unfortunately, this recently here, there's been a big zero day that has come out and is related to a big work suite of software that lots of major organizations use called Confluence. This is, of course, an Atlassian product. They're a company that owns a number of other things like Jira and Trello as well. But this has been a big advisory and large enough to warrant the Department of Homeland Security and the CISA agency sending out a warning about it. Katie, talk to us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so as Alex mentioned, there was a critical zero-day vulnerability in the Atlassian Confluence suite. So through this vulnerability, attackers were able to create administrator accounts on exposed endpoints and then get further into your system to steal information or, just do bad guy things. But the patch came out in early October, so earlier this month. But once Microsoft Threat Intelligence started investigating, they saw that some active exploitations went all the way back to September 14th. So kind of like Alex mentioned, it's just goes to show how 0 days can go for a good period of time without an available patch, where you have to try to mitigate to the extent possible using workarounds. So there were almost 3 weeks of no patch for this particular vulnerability. And during that time, a pretty prolific Chinese APT group known as Dark Shadow, Orloxy, Storm 0062, depending on who's tracking it, was actually exploiting this vulnerability. So this particular actor was indicted back in 2020, has been hacking all kinds of organizations globally and in the United States, of course, since 2009, and have stolen hundreds of millions of dollars worth of intellectual property from different organizations. So, they used to kind of fly a little more under the radar. I guess now that they've been indicted, it's kind of a little more public and they're out there doing this activity again. They were very successful in the past. They're likely to continue to be successful. So they're going to continue to exploit these 0 day vulnerabilities, whether it's in Confluence or, other widely used software platforms and things like that. So it's really, really important as an organization to make sure that you are monitoring for alerts from the different vendors that you're using in your environment, that you are using your patch management effectively, that when there is no patch, you are following any workarounds that are advised by the vendor to make sure that you are trying to mitigate your risk as much as possible. And then also just kind of making sure that you're remediating if you are hit by a attack of any sort where the information may have been exfiltrated.
Yeah, and especially for all of these, sometimes these companies can release, mitigations and say, "Hey, here's some things you can do to try to reduce the risk. Close this port, turn off this setting." An attempt, but for some companies they can't, and the only thing they can wait on is that patch, which of course makes them extra vulnerable. Continuing our spooky 0 days, there's another one that was out fresh off the presses, and it is perennial network powerhouse Cisco, who's landed in the 0 day crosshairs. Kyle, tell us a little bit about what's going on over there.
Yep, as you said, this one is ongoing, so there's not a ton of information out about it right now, including the hackers responsible. Right now, no one knows who it is. So this kind of started in the past month. It's estimated to start maybe around September 18th, but it's still kind of happening as we speak. There isn't any patching information or packages available right now to fix this, which causes even more of a problem, especially for any Cisco-based enterprise network, right? You don't really have a choice or a way to kind of get off that platform and operate unless you take down everything and completely re-architect your network. So, as we're going through this, we were talking about earlier of software side. Well, this is more on kind of operating system or really firmware for hardware. So you're being attacked from two different angles here for both of these, where you're relying on vendors for both software, you're relying on for hardware, and they're built-in operating systems for that hardware. So this is just kind of getting in more to almost like a vendor selection of figuring out, have they been great about securing their devices in the past, which generally, as we know, Cisco has a pretty good track record. Our 0 day is going to be found in devices and operating systems going forward. Yes, I mean, it's going to be constant. But the kind of thing you have to think about is how often is this happening for this particular vendor? What's their response typically like? Are they quick about it? Are they getting patches out the window pretty quick so you can apply it to devices and secure your network? Well, until more information is really released about this, there's not really a way to do that.
Mm-hmm. Any recommendations for those mitigations for the time being at all?
You might want to cut there because that one I don't know.
I think you got something.
I can help you with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as Kyle mentioned, this is currently ongoing. There's no available patch, but as of yesterday, during the investigation, they found that more than 34,000 of these devices have already been hacked. And then if you look on Shodan, more than 140,000 of these devices are exposed to the internet and are potential vectors for additional hacking. So in the meantime, the vendor has recommended that you disable the web interface on your iOS XE devices. And also remove all management interfaces from the internet immediately until that patch is released. And then Cisco Talos has also put out a script that you can run on your system to see if you have been attacked already, if you are a victim. And VulnCheck has also released a scanner to help you check and see if you've been compromised. So those are some great places to start with seeing if you've already become a victim and need to take further action, and also to kind of stop this potential vector from getting onto your network.
Don't love it. Moving right along to one of my other favorite ones, it's Move It. This is not a campaign to get you out and get you exercising. Unfortunately, it's one of the biggest data thefts of 2023, and it's been going on in the news for just a minute here or two. Kyle, tell us a little bit about this one, because it's been circulating pretty frequently, and again, it still continues to be updated in terms of its impact.
Yep. So Move It is a secure file transfer software that a lot of different organizations use for different things, right? So it can be both private, going from corporation to corporation. It could be private to public for a government contractor who is submitting data to regulators. In that case, going into that, one of the biggest affected clients has been government related. It is someone who's submitting over secure files to the government. 11 million individuals, PHI and SSNs were taken just from that single contractor itself. But MoveIt's been used like a lot in the industry, right? So it goes into anything from, okay, well, we have some sensitive information that we need to transfer somewhere. How are you going to do that? That's what this product was designed to do. However, when a 0 day comes across for it, you don't have a way to securely transfer that information. Anything that's residing on MOVEit servers was just kind of open gate if that information is still residing there. I've had a little bit of experience in response to this one from my previous employer where, it was used to submit things to regulators. So you had to go in and make sure that what information was submitted over, what's the exposure looking like, and then you can kind of get a handle on where you're exposed, how you're exposed. You'd have to be in touch with your regulatory entity there to see, are they patching it? Are you patching on your end, et cetera? So there's a lot of different pieces for both ends that you would have to kind of take into account, both the file source and the file destination. While it's primarily related to where the file is sitting on the server, who owns that server, from who originates and sends, that's where a lot of the information is being taken from.
That's probably the toughest part with this one in particular, but I think it does go back to these other ones as well from the 0-day side, is these aren't just things you can just stop using and go, well, it's vulnerable, right? We're not going to use it. If you're submitting some filings into a regulatory agency, that's their business process. And the expectation is you're still going to be doing it, especially in the government. It takes months, years to authorize systems. So they're not just going to rip it out and slap in something else. And so oftentimes companies and cybersecurity practitioners in particular are stuck trying to figure out ways and solutions to try to mitigate that risk as best they can until hopefully the risk is actually remediated with some sort of update. That's a tough position because we want businesses to keep succeeding. We want these processes, people to keep sharing information on Confluence, to be sharing information with regulatory agencies or using their networking equipment in their data center office, and you can't just turn it off. It's a tough position to be in.
Yep. Luckily, there was a patch that was released pretty quickly for response on this one, so everyone could start basically going in and plugging the holes right away. So, as it still continues to gather who was affected, the information is released, breach notifications have been made, because the timing, it was a pretty big window for when it was in effect. You continue to see more kind of companies or entities reporting that they were affected. So the cost of this one keeps rising throughout the year.
I love it. In our last couple minutes here, I did want to talk about some of our own personal horror stories from clients and places past, of course, redacted for what has happened. Kyle, I'll let you kick it off with the one about a keyboard and a pen test as well.
Yep. So we've talked about multiple times how employees are usually the weak link, right? It's the factor that you can't really control with administrator privilege, right? That doesn't work exactly like that. Behavior of a human is not confined. So during a pen test, there was a case where, it was an internal test for malicious insider. There was the opportunity to kind of walk around on the floor as you went through and look for things of note, of interest. Happened to sit down at one of the desks to start, testing some of the ports, whether or not we could get on, if NAC was in place. The keyboard was moved, which contained what looked like a username and some random characters, so you would think a password. Well, it was a password. The name was actually for an admin account. Oof. So kind of already step one way through the window into an admin account during a pen test. Not a good look.
I love the idea too that you're not even potentially even looking for passwords. You're like, let me just move this keyboard out of the way so I can put my laptop down and get to work. Yep. And never mind, I don't need to get to work. My work is done here. Outstanding.
Yep.
Oh man, Katie, what's a good story that you can share?
Yeah, so just one that we heard this morning. Actually, we have a client who, this is their story, of course. They've implemented protections on their networks to make sure that you can't use USBs and removable media you can't even plug it into their system at all. Not only can you not move data off the system onto a flash drive, they don't want you using flash drives whatsoever, including, your iPhone charging cord or anything like that. But they had previously, before this was implemented on their system, seen an employee who plugged in a portable lava lamp via their USB charger. This employee claims that the only thing it could possibly do was use the power to power the lava lamp, which sure, maybe you would think that, but you just really never know when it comes to things like USBs that they could have been modified anywhere along your supply chain. They could, have swapped out your USB port with something that's got a little hidden flash drive and malware, tucked into that port there. So you just really don't even want to take that risk with something so benign as a lava lamp. It's just not worth the risk. I know many of you may have seen different posts of, career fairs at NSA where they've got a whole lineup of, USB-based phone chargers for you to plug in and charge your phone. Just goes to show how many people are not as aware of the dangers of simply plugging in a device to something that you are not familiar with. It could very easily be used to steal your data off of that device. It could very easily have malware hidden in something that you're plugging into your device or anything like that, whether it's just as simple as a lava lamp. So
it sure would be a shame to be
just kind of a funny
cause
one.
of a data breach. With malware-laden lava lamps. And again, here in Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we'll of course reiterate, USBs both charge but transmit data. Our recommendation is always, if you're out and about in an airport, use your plug, the adapter, to plug in your device. Don't use those USB slots that are readily available. You don't know what's going to be transmitted across them. Probably one of my favorite horror stories is something that actually takes us out to the physical world. Of course, we think a lot about digital information, but there is, believe it or not, things that are still printed on paper. Oftentimes, companies will shred and have contracts with shredding companies to destroy this physical paper and even oftentimes digital media. So they may shred old hard drives from servers for you. So there's all kinds of companies that do this. This day, though, a truck had arrived to shred some paper materials for a company. The shredder broke down, as I guess they probably do pretty often, got jammed. And they said, hey, we're going to take this truck back and we'll bring in another one to finish the job. And so off the truck drives. The catch in this case was that the jam was in the shredder and the hopper that loaded it in. And as this truck proceeded to head out down the road and off onto the highway, the air passing over the top of the exhaust chute creates a negative pressure, if you're interested in aerodynamics at all, and literally proceeded to pull all of the unshredded personal information, checks, and other financial documents up through the roof of this truck and scattershot them behind the truck as it drove down the highway. Luckily, a good Samaritan called it in and said, there's a bunch of stuff here that appears to have your company's name on it. Don't know if you want it back. The team, of course, had to mobilize, go out there and comb the highway to pick up as much as they could. But that's a tough proposition because oftentimes there's a forensic trail in the digital world when things are stolen. You can maybe figure out what the impact was, how much data was touched, but it's hard to know if you got all of the paper. And so for them, it was a bit of a nightmare to clean up. Not something you might ever think about in an incident response scenario or even planning from a risk management perspective, but it is now something that I always include. So you can plan for a lot of things. You can't plan for everything. And unfortunately, that is the world of cybersecurity. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us for our Spooky Stories episode. We really appreciate you being here. And as always, our experts here at Hive Systems can help ensure you're not the next scary story as well. So please reach out anytime by visiting us at www.hivesystems.io. Before we go, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you can be alerted for our next episode. You can go to www.hivesystems.io/HiveLive. Next month, we're going to be talking about another exciting topic from the world of cybersecurity, so make sure you don't miss it, again, by subscribing to our channel at www.hivesystems.io/HiveLive. Until next time, remember, when it comes to cybersecurity, you need to act and not react. Thank you.